Progressive Action TV show. I am your host, Tramel Thompson, founder of Progressive Action, the #1 labor and community TV show in New York City. Today, we have a very, very, very special guest. But before I get into that, I want to promote something real quick. You guys need to check out WeMoveNewYork.com, where you can find your depot hats. For an example, you can find New York City Transit hats, conductor hats, train operator hats, bus operator hats. Not sanctioned by the MTA, of course, but they are cool to wear. WeMoveNewYork.com also have vests. Each depot have their own vest. That's cool. They ain't got nothing for RTO yet, but it's all good. And they have hoodies, they have sleeves, they have gloves, they have everything. It's WeMoveNY.com. WeMoveNY.com. They also make the Progressive Action bubble coats, winter bubble coats. So we definitely want to check out their website. If you a bus operator or whatever the case is, check out their site, get some gear. It's cool, it's fresh, it's unique. WeMoveNY.com. Now, as I said before, we have a very special guest. This man was the last militant leader this union has ever seen. He led the 2005 strike. When I first came to transit in 2013, I thought that he was still president. That's how much I was out the loop. A community activist, community leader, not only in New York. We talking about in his country, the country he's from. Mr. Roger Toussaint, how are you doing, sir?
Very good, Tramel. You should apologize for your late start.
Listen, they don't know we late, but you just told everyone that we was late. Maybe it was your computer.
Well,
but I'll tell you this, Roger. You looking so young, so vibrant. What's the secret?
The secret. When I step away from this camera, you'll see my big belly. That's my secret.
But you look young, you look fresh. I like your haircut.
Yeah, right now I'm hiding the belly, yeah.
Okay, so look, I want to jump straight into it. This is my third time interviewing you, and it has been a pleasure every time. Your shows do extremely well. People always go back to revisit the shows, but this one is going to be very intense. Not only for the viewers, but for myself as well, because when I interviewed you all those other times, I wasn't as knowledgeable as I am now, and you gave me a lot of that knowledge. You know, you put me on this stuff. Even up until yesterday, you continue to send out information, and I'm very happy that I was able and blessed to interview you for this is the third time, but this one is going to be special. So right now we have the 2021 union election, and you put out a statement on December 1st, 2021, talking about Paulie Navarro and Tony Utano is basically the same person. I want you to expand on that, or just tell the viewers who didn't get a chance to read it, the statement that you wrote. What you mean that Paulie Navarro and Tony Utano is the same person?
Well, first of all, I did issue that statement on December 1st after I was clear that most of the balloting would have been completed. I wanted to not affect the election, how people voted, but I wanted to go on record. And my statement elaborated on why I viewed Utano and Paul Navarro as being the same, and essentially pointed out that transit workers could expect no difference in terms of direction of the union, in terms of policies of the union, or in terms of membership mobilization. In all of those respects, they're the same, and they do not represent a difference. And people should go to the statement that I issued. I don't know exactly where it's being carried, but for your viewers' purposes, maybe you should post it at this time on Progressive Action for people's clarity. But it points out that Utano, I actually know from. We first of all, we all came out of the same department, maintenance of way department. I came out of the track division. Utano came out of the power division. Paul Navarro is from the track division. I became track chair, division chair in 1995, and at that time, Utano was already a division chair of power division, which is a much smaller division of about 1,100 people, members. And later on, Utano was put in charge of what you call farming out by the prior administration, Willie James. But Utano represents what in the TW is the old guard through and through. He's been around almost forever. Paulie Navarro was not on my track committee, but he joined the committee under Samuelson while I was president of the union. And essentially his profile was go along, get along, very obedient to Samuelson. Now, if you put aside what people say of themselves to sell themselves, and you go by their record, then you have to ask yourself when challenges came up for transit workers, how did they perform? How did they answer the call? And they were over the better part of the last 15 plus years, there were many opportunities for Paul Navarro to say and do things differently or to answer the call in that way. Most recently, of course, there was a pandemic. But going back into before the pandemic, there were layoffs, there were challenges with the health benefits, there were the negotiation of two-tier systems where some employees were put at a disadvantage compared to others. For instance, cleaners were placed into, I think, a 5-year progression. And of course, there was the imposition of a tier 6 pension in 2012. And then, which is what we struck over in 2005 to block precisely that from being imposed. So Paul Navarro had opportunities from since before the strike, after the strike, through tier 6, through all of these challenges, layoffs, and so forth, to chart a different course. He failed consistently and repeatedly. So my contention is that if you want to know how someone is going to operate when they get into power or when they get into office, the best indication of that is how they operated before they got into power, before they got into office.
All right, so you also within that same, I guess, open letter that you put out, you made a distinction that Paulie Navarro have some members with good intentions on his slate. Do you think that Utano have some slate members with good intentions?
Well, let me just deal with the first part of that. I understand that most trans workers are pretty desperate for change. There have been, of the 170 something members who died, not transit employees that died, the bulk, of course, have been local 100 members. I don't know the exact number. It's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 140. And the union has been going downhill, and the members have become more and more disconnected with the union. So I can understand the desperation for change, and therefore you latch on to whatever opportunity that seemed to present itself for that change. So I think that's what I meant. That's what I meant when I said that there are clearly some people who have good intentions and who hope for the best, who hope for a change of leadership and administration, and they have joined Paul Navarro on those grounds, and I believe that they I'm convinced, I'm 100% clear that they're going to be proved to be mistaken. With respect to Utano's entire crew is more from the get go more bought off and corrupt as well. Now there are numbers of these people that started off as supporting my administration, and I think over time they got tired because when you if you understand in a principle politics and principle positions, the wear and tear can be great, and you can get exhausted or burnt out. And I think there are a number of people around Utano who once supported me, and some of whom I liked, but who have chosen their course and are no longer of any value in terms of the fight against the MTA.
All right. So because last time I spoke to you live, I believe that two of your supporters, RP Nelson Rivera and Shirley Martin, had went over to the Stand United slate. And I think that we all was waiting to see what their move was going to be. And, you know, unfortunately, Nelson passed last year. Shirley is still around, and she's running under Stand United. Would you consider her someone with good intentions still waving the Stand United flag?
Yeah, probably so. I mean, I like Shirley, and Shirley is a militant person. But I believe that she is one who would fall in the category of being worn down and have given up in terms
Does
of
does
principle. And there are a number of people like
is
that.
worn down a nice word for selling out?
I think it's more complicated than that. I think that you need to understand that people don't start off necessarily bad. But if you don't stay the course, if you do not maintain your vision and your values and fight for those values, then you're going to be end up making more and more mistakes, and down the road you would not be able to to recognize your former self. And that is so that's a process. That's not just an event. So I don't want to just use the term sellout, so that people don't grasp that this is a dynamic process that happens as people drift. I have seen it happen with literally thousands of activists in Local 100 who were different, when they started out.
Okay.
And
So
hopefully some of them may come up, may come back around. But as long as you're following Tony Utano's direction and you're not standing up for what you believe in, then you don't have you don't bring any value to the table as far as
okay.
transit workers are concerned.
All right. So now me as being a transit worker and being active and an activist and trying to turn this union around, one thing that I noticed was that it seemed as if there was no foundation left for us activists to go against the Samuelsons, the Tony Utanos. You saying Paulie is cut from that same cloth. What went wrong during, I would say, your administration that didn't set people up to fight, to have a successful fight against them? Because it seemed like we was left out there to figure it out for ourselves.
Well, I think that I don't agree with that. Just the mere fact that yourself and so many other people are involved and active is a far difference from how things were when we enter the fray, enter the fight. And we can go into that. But my administration launched the first shop steward mobilization program, and within the first year we had recruited over 1,100 shop stewards, and we conducted numbers of strikes on properties other than the MTA. And lots of mobilizations, lots of demonstrations. At times we brought Midtown Manhattan to a freeze with 15, 16, 17,000 members. We demonstrated outside Livingston Street in the thousands. We marched across the bridges. We did shop gates and stopped work in numerous depots. and took trains out of service and stopped jobs all over. And that enlivened the whole generation of activists who, for the first time, at least got the message that they were capable of being involved and taking leadership positions. Now, prior to that, the union was a club for old boys, and it tended to be very white. And if you go down to the union hall, they would look at you strangely and say, what are you doing here down here? Because you were on foreign territory. Um, what we did is return the union to the membership. So in that respect, um, we laid a foundation. Now, if you think that nothing was changed, let me describe further. Um, think of if you started at the Transit Authority and your training wage was $4 an hour until the 2002 contract that we negotiated. That was the deal: $4 an hour training wage. At that time, there were in excess of 16,000 disciplinary actions filed against transit workers each and every year. 16,000. The health benefits at the time were it had previously had reserves of $45 million, and the MTA was allowed to raid it and draw that money down until the health benefits ended up in the red. It was running a deficit. In fact, the New York State Insurance Board ordered that the benefits be cut as soon as I became president. They ordered a reduction in benefits because that's what the law requires when you don't have enough money to pay for the benefits. Imagine if you were a traffic checker. You would, on Friday evening, on Tuesday evening, you would gather your child together and get a blanket from your closet and go down to 130 Livingston Street and camp out at 130 Livingston Street overnight from Tuesday into Wednesday morning in the hope that you would be among the first traffic checkers at the window when work was being given out on Wednesday morning. And scores of traffic checkers who did not get work would have to go home without work because their contract, their TW Local 100 contract, for these several hundreds of members, says that they could be issued from 0 to 25 hours of work per week. So Transit Authority was authorized to not give them any work or 25 hours. Um, and that was the situation when we took over. And mind you, this is a workforce that was 95% black and Hispanic and about 75% female. Imagine when we took over the finances, the local was $5 million, $15 million, $15 million in the red. And that consisted of a $5 million deficit for the staff pension plan. They had an outstanding $3.4 million loan. So they had a debt to that extent. They had a $4.5 million balloon payment due on the Union Hall, which was located at the time on West End Avenue. That was due to the banks. And they had a outstanding $2 million line of credit. So that made up for $15 million in the red. Yet the officers were retiring with between $250,000 to $1 million in cash sums, which they had a cash out option, right? On top of the monthly pension they would get from the MTA. They had a Cadillac health benefit plan that was a vast improvement compared to the health benefit plan that transit workers enjoyed. And they had unlimited paid sick time. We had union officers who were out sick for 2 years and being paid unlimited sick for 2 years. That was it. So that's the foundation we got. We changed all of that. Health benefits were put into the same plan as transit workers. The pension was stopped, and the pension was recalculated to be roughly the equivalent of what transit workers got. And we began to negotiate provisions to correct the injustices against traffic checkers. We began to shut down the disciplinary system. One of the first measures I did as the president of the union was fire each and every arbitrator who had been hearing cases for the transit authority and who had been firing our members. And the authority claimed this could not be done, this was illegal, and so on. But we did that to send a message to them and to change. So you stepped in to conditions that were considerably improved. While I recognize that things have gone downhill, and I'll tell you this: the this current generation of transit workers that you belong to, and people who started after the strike or before this, around that time, have been brought up on a generation brought up nursed on lies and misrepresentation by the current administration, so that on everything that comes up, they they attribute the blame to my administration.
And
Um,
we're gonna debunk some of those claims today. I'm gonna have some stuff on the screen, and it's very important that you debunk those things. But what I was talking about was, why wasn't there any a team left in place or a foundation of people who can successfully challenge Samuelson and now Utano? Because it seems like when I say we was left out there to figure things for ourselves, like there wasn't no players involved to really challenge the administration that took over.
well, that's what I attempted to do, of course, and this is a transition issue. I decided to move on, that I had done what I could for the local, and I was preparing to retire. I went to work for the international very briefly, because I could not tolerate working there either. But I decided to move on. I made a number of mistakes. That My biggest mistakes was, of course, allowing Samuelson to get the visibility that he had. But when we were preparing for the 2000, to the 2000, when we were preparing for the negotiations, the maintenance survey vice president at the time, Julio Rivera, we needed him to devote himself full time to strike preparations behind the scenes. And I asked two other people, Jose Iglesias and Leroy Jardim, to take the position of acting vice president, and they declined it. So Samuelson was a third choice, and I obviously regret that immensely. My other mistake was the colleague from your department, Curtis State.
Why you putting him on me?
Well, Curtis State was one of the vice presidents, and it's kind of natural that you would look among the vice presidents for next in line of succession and leadership. Um, it turns out that anyone would have been better than him, and I made a big mistake of being fooled by him. And he was obviously making deals with Samuelson beforehand and certainly afterhand, and he arranged a job for himself and his girlfriend with Samuelson and betrayed everybody who supported him. So I regret that, no doubt.
Oh, but Curtis Tate is one person, right?
Mm.
What about, like, who was the other players? Like, I'm trying to figure out, how did you feel comfortable leaving to go to the international without making sure, besides Curtis Tate, everyone else was in place to make sure we hold on to the power, or your
Well,
administration hold on to the power?
well, at the time, keep in mind that I left in Curtis State became acting president at the beginning of 2009. So I left at the end of 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, I continued to be technically the president and finish the negotiations of the 2009 contract. but Curtis State was the acting president for all of 2009. Um, at that time, you had Nelson Rivera, who was strong and the vice president for car equipment. You had Stephen Thomas, who was vice president for TA Surface. You had Andrea Vapinda, who was vice president for stations department, and so on. So there were a number of people who were pretty good soldiers when I left. And the elections was just at the end of 2009. I didn't run in the elections, but I supported the people I left behind, led by Curtis State. And that, like I said, was a big mistake. And it turned out that um, except for Nelson Rivera um, and Stephen Thomas, I can't recall if any others won their elections for vice president. I don't recall whether Andrew Vapinda won in stations department. I'm not certain, but at least those two won their position, right? But there were lots of activists all over the properties that had become enlightened and active under the almost 10 years of my administration.
All right.
Um,
Let me ask you this after because I'm gonna get into the strike in a few minutes, and I'm gonna play some videos from your 2005 strike website. Um, what year was the election after the strike? Was
After the strike, there was an election in 2006 and then an election in 2009.
All right. So the 2006 election, I believe at least a lot of people ran for president. I think in that election, and I think you got like 35% of the vote or something like that. Do you recall that?
I think it was more like 40% or
Like
40,
40,
low 40s, low 40s.
low 40s.
Yeah.
Um, why do you think the turnout was so low as far as you getting 40% of the vote and not the majority of the vote that election?
Well, we had just come out of a strike that had stopped the city of New York, and we came under massive attack. Not only were our dues taken away from us, um, but generally speaking, the attacks were unprecedented. The daily attacks in the media, so that helped encourage and support opposition elements inside of the local. They were encouraging that deliberately. That was part of their revenge on us for the strike. So, for instance, you have guys a number of them, like Mike Ruby ran a slate that called Fresh Start Slate. Mike Ruby then became a supervisor, and he's now head the Triple SA.
Mm-hmm.
Ainsley Stewart led a slate in car equipment. He is now a superintendent working for the MTA. All of these people were encouraged to come out against the local and to say things and do things, right? Samuelson, of course, turned out to be the more effective in terms of taking over the reins at the local, but he was always working closely with management as well.
Mm.
So you have that type of was a complex situation. But I had personally done what I had led the local. I had done the strike, and I had gotten the deals restored. And then I felt it was time for me to move on and for the next generation to handle business.
All right. So now, I understand that you had difficulties with the strike as far as being undermined by Samuelson, Utano, and I want to work people through the strike. And a lot of people don't understand that the strike was a two-step process. You didn't just say, transit workers, we're going on strike or whatever the case was. The plan was to first shut down Tri-Barrel Coach and Jamaica Bus, and because they wasn't bounded by the Taylor law. What kind of message were you trying to send to the MTA by having Tri-Barrel Coach and Jamaica Bus strike first before the actual strike?
Well, it was a two-phase thing, and it was just one day apart. The first day of the strike was called on the bus lines that were not subject to the Taylor law, and the second day of the strike, it went all across the MTA. Obviously, the first day was a shot across the bow to let them know that we were serious, because apparently in the event that they didn't think that we were going to walk. So that was the point. And it made sense. Plus, it allowed us, the contract had expired at the TA. It had expired, I believe, on the Thursday, right? And I calculated personally, and I shared this with the executive board, that it would not be wise to go on strike on the Friday, because then you have the intervening weekend, and you don't have the passenger load is of course much less. You don't have people going to work, and therefore a lot of the punch of the strike would be lost if we went to strike on a Friday going into the Saturday, Sunday. So that we had nothing to lose by holding off until Monday and beginning the strike in the private bus lines, and then Tuesday take the strike MTA wide. It also allowed us to message the public to say that we were trying to be flexible and understanding. That's why we didn't pull the plug on Friday. We gave the MTA a few more days to come around to their senses. Now, that is an important lesson, because the minute you lose the public, you're going to lose the strike, you're going to lose the battle. And current day transit workers need to understand that before people start attacking passengers and the public and thinking they can do it on their own. If you lose the public, you lose the battle.
That's and I fully believe in that, because I don't understand why this current union administration don't make allies with the public regarding anything. So a lot of people also think that you were the one who said, let's go on strike. They don't understand how a vote goes to strike. They don't know that's the E-board that actually choose to go on strike, and you basically follow the E-board orders. Were you surprised when the E-board voted to strike?
No, actually, I advocated. What people do need to understand that they didn't even vote on the board. Normally, the president of the union doesn't vote unless a vote is needed to break a tie vote. So I didn't even vote on the strike issue. But I want to be clear. I was the leader of the union, and I led the executive board, and I recommended going on strike, and I believe completely and absolutely that was the correct move to make. So the executive board voted in a majority to go on strike, and the proof is in the pudding, right? The outcome of the strike. We said went on strike because we were not going to agree to a new pension tier, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
hold on, before you touch on that,
yeah.
Roger, because that's very important, because you still have people who's a part of Stand United still saying that lie, and I want to separate the pension issue with the strike. You're going to get into that. I think that's very important that the members need to hear that. So I want you to touch on that right now. We go get in that after. I'm gonna play a video that of you in the news, talking about the second day of the strike, the comments from Pataki and Bloomberg.
Go ahead.
And I just want you to explain that further. What was your mind frame on the second day of the strike and this speech that you gave? So I'm going to play it right now. Hey, is this playing?
I want to also address some of the remarks that have been made characterizing our members and our leadership in the course of these negotiations by the governor and the mayor.
It's very low.
There's been some offensive and insulting language used, such as referring to our union members and our leadership as thugs, selfish, and essentially characterizing us as being overpaid and greedy. And this is regrettable, and it is certainly
it's long yet, but I can hear it. But basically, in that video, you was responding to Bloomberg calling us thugs, the disrespect of that, and what was going through your mind? What was going through your mind? Because the makeup of New York City Transit, the MTA, and Bloomberg basically calling transit workers thugs, and you was saying that no, we're not thugs. We are actually your neighbors. We are the person that's living next door to you. We're in the grocery store with you. We are not thugs. But as a black man, what was going through your mind when you heard Bloomberg say these thugs?
Well, I understood very clearly this was a dog whistle. A dog whistle in the sense that it was a racial undertone to that. He would not have used that type of description to describe white union leaders. At the same time, I understood that he was attempting to isolate transit workers and to strike fear and intimidate them, but isolate us from the public. I think that backfired. On the second day of the strike, we also had commissioned polls. Actually, we didn't. Polls were conducted among New Yorkers by some of the major news outlets. And they reported that a majority of New Yorkers, even though they had been inconvenienced by the strike, supported us and not the MTA. And that was part of an explicit poll result on the second day of the strike. So just what we saw is what the public saw. And people were not going for it.
All right. Now, let me ask you, when I played that last video, you heard it, but it was low?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to play another video right now. And this video was actually done by very recent, a few days ago, by Donald Yates. And he was basically saying that the strike wasn't about pension, them trying to give us tier 6 back then. So I'm going to play this video. Hopefully you can hear this, but I want the members to hear it. If you can't hear it, we'll just wait. It's on like 45 seconds. I will explain to you what he said. And then I want you to explain the pension issue within the strike. So here we go. Let's see if you can hear it.
On the drop. Jewel number 2. What did we go on strike for? Well, a lot of people will tell you that we went on strike because we defended the unborn pension contribution, because they wanted to raise your pension contribution up to 6%. However, pensions is not a mandatory subject of bargaining. Right now, I've bargained some contracts on the lower level within my department, and I know for a fact that pensions are not a mandatory subject of bargaining. So why would we go on strike for something that we didn't even have to bargain over anyway? Right? So the strike was really something else. All right? The members was mad at all the disciplines and everything that was going on in the system. So we were down for a strike, even if management dropped a string on the ground. We was going to go on strike. But to say that it was because of a pension issue, that's the biggest lie that has been ever told. And for those
So Roger, basically, did you hear him?
Yeah, I understand. I can speak to it.
All right. Yeah, can you please explain? Because this is coming from a guy that say I negotiated, contracts on a lower level. And I personally think that Donald Yates is an idiot. Nice guy, but I don't think that he's that intelligent. Could you please explain to the people what really happened and not this Donald Yates version?
Well, just so people clear, Donald Yates' narrative is not new. The narrative says that the strike was more or less unnecessary. And the reason is because pensions are a mandatory subject, a non-mandatory subject of bargaining. And therefore, essentially, all you had to do was say no, and it would go away. Now, he didn't invent this argument. Sonny Hall wrote an article to the chief. Sonny Hall was the previous international president before, back in the around the strike, actually. No, before the strike, sorry. Sonny Hall wrote an article to the chief making the same claim, saying that the strike was unnecessary. So the problem with that is the notice that you have up there. We filed before we went on strike. We filed with the courts for an injunction against the MTA for insisting upon a change in the pension as the part of the final offer. And the injunction explains, as well as I explained at the time, and in numerous times after that. Just the injunction and in the press conference that you attempt that where I spoke with on the second day of the strike, I explained that you can discuss or negotiate over pensions in negotiations. However, because pensions are a non-mandatory subject of bargaining, you cannot. It was illegal for the MTA to attempt to impose a change in pension as part of its final offer. That injunction request was denied by the courts before we went on strike. So the courts were saying, no, we want the MTA to be able to push for a change in the pension. So that's the record. We did that before. So now Donald Yates know this personally because when throughout all of this, I was calling meetings, what we call the joint executive board meetings of not only the executive board members, but all section and division officers. And I explained all of this to meetings in which Donald Yates was in the audience. Sonny Hall just has his own political agenda, but Donald Yates understood that we had gone through the process of seeking an injunction. So he's, quite frankly, purposely misleading people when he says that, that this was unnecessary and we just went out. Now, what does that mean, though? What does it mean to say you in the middle of a strike, and Donald Yates signs a letter that says that we
I'm gonna
should
get into that. I'm gonna get into that. I'm gonna get into that, Roger. So look, I have the injunction request actually on the screen right now. I don't know if you can see it, but it says the instant application seeks an order enjoining the MTA from insisting that Local 100 agree to a change in pension benefits, which requires legislative action and is thus a non-mandatory subject of bargaining. So it looked like you were fighting against Tier 6 then because the MTA was trying to get us to agree to a pension change then. So I don't understand what Donald Yates is talking about. Now, back to the letter that you were talking about. I got that on the screen right now.
Do you understand that the next step from making it... Hold on. Hello?
Yeah, I hear you.
The next step from putting it in their final offer is that the parties, an impasse is declared, and then those issues are put before an arbitration panel. So the effect of this final offer would be that the decision on a pension, on a new pension, would have been before an arbitration panel to decide or settle. And we were not going to allow that to happen. Donald Yates wanted the members to vote on it so that the pension could be the Tier 6 pension would go ahead. Their objective was that they didn't care what happened down the road. Get their wage increase and let the next generation of transit workers, let them figure it out for themselves and fight their own fight. That was their attitude.
So it's safe to say that Donald Yates did not care about the unborn. And we, like you said, we basically figure it out for ourselves.
Yeah, down the road.
Okay. So now there's a letter that I have on the screen right now. And this letter, according to the date 12/21/05, was written during the strike, the actual strike. What do you think was the purpose of this letter? And Donald Yates did sign this letter with look like over 20 other people, 30 people. Donald Yates did sign this letter. What you think was the motivation of this letter, and what did they attempt to do?
Well, I saw that letter for the first time on the second day of the strike while I was involved in intense negotiations to settle the strike at a hotel in Midtown Manhattan. And the intention of this obvious letter was to collapse the strike. What does it mean when you're in the middle of a strike to say, well, wait a minute, instead of being on strike, we should have had go to a vote? I mean, that is classic strike breaking. Put to a vote something that's already in play. So how do we do this exactly? Call off the strike? How do we put it? But keep in mind, the executive board voted, and the executive board had strike authorization from the membership, and that's the way it's done. Done on its notice. So this was while I'm in the middle of battle with the MTA. We had two things going on. The International issued a statement telling people to cross the picket line, report to work, and then that's it up there. Right? This was posted on all the properties all over this. Management was posting the international notices. And then simultaneously, Mr. Yates and others were saying that we should have a vote instead of what we were doing.
So in the middle of a strike,
right,
he was trying to break the strike.
He was trying to collapse the strike.
And would you consider that scab behavior?
Well, there's no question. It's an attempt to undermine the strike in the middle of the strike.
That's sad.
No, this is not reflective of MAPSTOR members. And this notion, in his letter, it says, because the members' resolve is beginning to wear thin. He was speaking about himself and other people who signed that letter. This was not the members. In MAPSTOR, the strike was strong, right? And you had less crossing of the picket lines. So this hiding behind the members is obviously one of the something that tricksters do. Blame it on the members instead of taking responsibility and leadership.
Do you think at the time he collaborated with Samuelson and Utano? Because I understand that they were trying to break the strike also.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that this was inspired by people like Mike Detron, who now runs the Retirees Association, Sonny Hall, who was a retired international president at the time. And they encouraged these officers to go down the wrong path. And Donald Yates is good at very few things except following. So he just followed along because he just aspires to advance his career. So they figured the easiest way to do that is go along, get along.
Now, before the strike, I believe, why did you fire John Samuelson from staff or something like that?
Yes. We fired John Samuelson from staff close to 2 weeks before we went on strike, because all of the officers and staff, we were at the time engaged in order to actually prepare for a strike but avoid one. We were engaged in what we call days of action. And this would occur every week and every 2 weeks. We would designate a day and hold simultaneous protest actions at dozens of locations and scores of locations all over the city. And that would include slowdowns, lunchtime protests, shop gates, marches, and demonstrations. And the officers were all instructed to organize protests outside, in and out of TA properties in order to send a message to the MT that we were serious and the troops were mustering, were getting together. Samuelson was the acting vice president who failed to lift a finger to help any of those activities, right? Or even to mobilize for the mass membership meeting that was held, I believe, on December 8th or so, before the strike. And in fact, our information and reports we received is that he was discouraging people from coming to the mass membership meeting. So they were purposely trying to weaken our strength, our muscle in the lead up to the strike. He was very much involved in leading that effort. So I fired him prior to the strike. Now, in all of this, he had long been collaborating with elements in the international union around Sonny Hall and others who were writing flyers and issuing it anonymously and distributing it in the property to undermine our administration. And Samuelson was very much part of that.
And you also sent back JP. At what point did you send back JP, the current TA Service vice president?
but that was later. I sent back JP in 2009. I was Curtis Tate was the acting vice president, but I was still the president of the union, and it was brought to my attention that there were hearings at East New York Avenue in TA Surface, and that he was assigned to and instructed to. That would be his typical assignment. Instead, he had shown up at other locations because elections were approaching, and he wanted to have some presence of visibility for election purposes elsewhere. So he abandoned his location. So I sent him an email saying, "Why did this happen? Explain yourself." He ignored it for quite a while, and I sent him further emails, and then he sent me back a curt message saying, who are you? Who are you to ask me anything? So I showed him who I was. I told him, report back to the clinic. You're going to be driving a bus in about a few hours, right? So I sent him back to his stools, because a lot of these guys, one of the challenges in running the union is requiring people that are being paid by the union and by members to be accountable, right? Rather than thinking that you can just go up, show up or not show up, or just hide, or just do what you want and so forth. But that's the old way of doing things, and that's the way that's being returned. Everybody gets to do what they want. And JP he felt that he didn't have to answer to anyone. And certainly he didn't want to answer to Stefan. And Stefan was the vice president of TA Surface. He was the senior person in TA Surface, union-wise.
So another question that comes up a lot is why.
By the way, let me just say this. That is the singular and only reason why JP ended up moving over and Willie Rivera to support Samuelson. It was all about JP wanting to be the candidate, our select candidate, to run as vice president of TA Surface. I completely refused to agree to move Stefan aside and put JP in his place. And it's only because of that, not because of any issue over should the union go in this direction or that direction, or do this or do that. It was strictly about JP's career, why he went over to Samuelson, because Samuelson was happy to have him run for the position of vice president on Samuelson's slate.
Well, you did know that JP tried to pull a coup d'etat on Utano last year and try to make a run for president.
Yeah, I heard that.
So that speaks to his character. So a lot of people always ask this question: why did Roger end the strike so early?
Well, I mean, the obvious reason is for you can't keep moving the ball, right? We went on strike. We issued written statements, and we did press conferences. I did 2 press conferences. One when we did on the strike on the private bus lines before that, and when we did the whole MTA, and I did press conferences during the strike. We consistently maintained that the strike was provoked by the MTA over their attempts to impose a Tier 6 pension on future transit workers.
Okay.
So once we got that resolved, and not only got that resolved, but we got them to agree as a result of the strike to give us Martin Luther King Day for the first time ever, and agree to a $131.7 million pension refund that was not on the table before, then it would have been ludicrous and stupid for us to say, you know what, let's stay out until the cows come home, right? Now, see how that would have gone over with the public. We told the public that we were striking for noble purposes, for the purposes of protecting our nephews and children and nieces and neighbors' children in the future from having reduced pensions and reduced benefits. But then once we got that, we were saying, oh, you know what? How about we want to do we want something else, move the ball again. Now, does that make sense to anyone? And the it's kind of irritating, because the clowns that say that we came back too early, we should have stayed out, right? They see eye to eye with the clowns that say that we should not have gone out on strike in the first place. So you no matter what you do, you're wrong. You shouldn't go out on strike, and they lock arms with the people that say we shouldn't come back from strike. And that's the nature of the business. And in track we used to call them shithouse lawyers.
and those clowns that you talk about,
yeah,
also like to blur history and like to blame the failures of Samuelson and Utano on the strike. But ironically, nothing bad happened. Like, we didn't take no losses after the strike. The losses didn't happen until Samuelson got in office.
Absolutely. If you look at every single loss, right? Of course, Tier 6 occurred in 2012, right? Before they finished their first term. The layoffs occurred in 2010, the first layoffs of hundreds of members. The spousal benefit in the private bus lines, they didn't touch it until Samuelson stepped in the door, right? Even though they claimed on that specific item, they claimed that the spousal benefit in private bus lines, this is for the surviving spouses of members who pass away. And that was a benefit that existed in the private bus lines. They claim that benefit should have expired in the spring of 2009. But I was still around. They didn't touch that benefit until Samuelson showed up. So what was happening was that the new administration under Samuelson and Utano consented or acceded to every adverse interpretation of the contract that the MTA came up with, right? Mm-hmm. So the explanation in 2010 with the layoffs was Roger gave up the no layoff clause. That's why we're having layoffs. When the health benefits was changed from one provider to the next, the explanation was Roger gave up the health benefit trust. That's why the MTA has the right to make those changes. When people get charged with chronic sick leave, they say, well, Roger gave up the put chronic sick into the contract, right? And when the spousal benefit was removed, they say, well, so what was happening is that they were so lacking of conscience and so anti-trade unionists that even if it meant destroying the local and destroying the contract, anything that made the prior administration look bad, they went along with it and worked with management on it. When the issue came up in 2000, in the first contract they negotiated, should we go on strike? They said, well, Roger gave up the no strike. Roger agreed in the contract to never go on strike, right? So that was the pattern of conduct, to blame every economic disaster on the prior administration and every inability to meet any political challenges on the prior administration. Now, unfortunately, as I said, you had people like Nicholas Bedell, who was the director of the education department, and Steve Dongs, who is a phony leftist socialist who floats around out there. And they were telling people, they helped groom a whole generation of transit workers who came up, especially after the strike, right? Groom them nurse them on lies and misrepresentations. None of these things were true, whether it is the spousal benefit, the no strike clause, the health benefit changes. None of these things were true. All right, but they have been drumming that into the membership with some degree of success for the past many years. Mm-hmm. All right. So part of what is going on there is that if you want to dismantle the changes we put in place, then one of the sure ways to do it is to demonize the agents of change, right? So they essentially created a whole narrative that said that the prior administration meant bad things for the local. They have nothing to say about the old guard before under Sonny Hall and the folks that ran the local into the ground and left it the way I just described, right? So that was the narrative that they were pushing. But you're correct. If you look at the actual history, bad things only began to happen under Samuelson.
Well, let me have you answer this. Why didn't it happen under you?
Let me give one quick example. The record of the American economy shows that the greatest economic downturn in the history of the United States since the Great Depression of the 1930s occurred under Barack Obama in 2008. Now, that was 3 years after the strike, right? And the greatest economic downturn, much greater than the one that Cuomo used to justify the layoffs in 2010, right? Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, we negotiated a contract in 2008 that was a positive contract without any givebacks, including that we put a cap on the contribution, on the medical contribution, the 1.5. We capped it at 1.5 and limited it to 40 hours. So we accomplished those things in the context of a Great Depression. Samuelson and they ran for office pointing to the 1.5 as the biggest sellout ever, right? And I could explain that 1.5 wasn't for existing medical, but it was for new medical benefits, right? Mm-hmm. And then what Samuelson did in 2012 contract, the first thing he did was increase the 1.5 to 2%.
Exactly.
And he gets away with it because I guess I am from Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn, but he's from Bensonhurst and Garrison Beach. And the members say, we like what we're more trusting of the Garrison Beach Bensonhurst crew. Let's go with that.
Mm-hmm. So that and why do you think that these bad things didn't happen with you versus Samuelson? Because
we maintain a highly mobilized membership, and we told everything that came up. We understood that conflict and whether you build or you get weak, it's about the power relationship between us and the MTA. So everything that we did was about making sure that we didn't lose the power, and the power resided not in what you say across the table, but in having a highly mobilized membership that the MTA understood was ready to go to battle. So I'll quickly tell you a story on this, right? Mm-hmm. Within 2 months of taking office as the president of the local, I led the first strike over on Liberty lines. Then before the 2005 transit strike, I conducted 6 strikes before the 2005 strike. 2 out on Liberty lines, 2 out on the Queens private bus lines, and multiple strikes out on the school bus lines. And we understood that we were communicating messages to Bloomberg, right? In fact, he called me up and he said to me, "Roger, why are you going out on strike so often? Is this what you're going to do when the MTA contract comes up?" Right? That's what he said to me on the phone. The point is, message sent, message received. Right? So when the MTA gets away with stuff now, it's because all of the messages that they receive is that they could get away with it and there will be no consequences. And they know how to read that very well. Because it's not about Tony Utano can say what he wants when he's speaking to the members about what's in his heart, supposedly, and what he think is right and what he think is wrong. Those things don't matter. What matters is whether is what the message, the actual message, what your conduct is when an issue or challenge comes up, like the pandemic, right?
Whoa, Roger, you jumping ahead. Yeah, jumping ahead. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm getting to that next. So, you put together a PDF, and it's called Benefits and Reforms, and it's basically a time, I wouldn't say a timeline, but a sectionalized accomplishments of what you guys did during your time as president in Local 100. And there's a section in there called Health and Safety. And you started off with TWU Local 100 members have always known that safety comes first and that a healthy workplace is the most important part of any job. Speaking of health and safety, we had the pandemic last year. The MTA told us that masks were against uniform policy. They didn't have social distancing set up, nothing set up. It was just like transit workers were to go on as life is normal while the rest of the world is worried and suffering and dying and things of that nature. If it was you, the president of Local 100, and the MTA told us workers that we are not allowed to wear masks, what would have been your next move?
Well, if members are unsafe, I believe under the law and under the principles we followed, that would be grounds to take what you call self-help for direct intervention, organized and mass intervention to save members' lives. That's how we roll, that's how we operated. But I'll come back to that in a second. If you would indulge me, you mentioned the PDF booklet called Benefits and Reforms at Local 100 between 2001 and 2007. And just give me a second to explain something on this.
Okay, go ahead.
People should really study that document because it represents profound changes with deep implications and consequences for the future. In terms of what it says about the balance of power, the point I was just making before, the balance of power between the workers and management. And it reflects changes in how Local 100 was doing business, who it works for, whether it works for the members or for the officer class. It reflected the priorities that we adopted in the area of contractual provisions. We prioritized. For instance, whether you negotiate provisions that promoted solidarity among the members and unity versus the greed and selfishness of each division, each title, and so forth. It reflected our emphasis on staff and officer responsibility and accountability instead of do whatever you want. So that list is an exhaustive list of all of the things that we were doing. Not all, but the vast majority of the things. And it is instructive in terms of progressive change. Now, let me give you an example of how this works safety wise. You were just asking me, the question you just asked me concerned the mask and the pandemic, right?
Basically stopping unsafe work.
Right. Now, in the two times that we almost struck in the MTA under my administration was in the 2002 contract. The month before, 2 signal maintainers were run over by trains and killed. And when that was discussed at the mass membership meeting in December, the Jacob Javits Center, we had many thousands of people there. Members voted unanimously for strike authorization. The next time we almost struck and ended up striking was in 2005, of course. And strangely enough, or interestingly enough, the month or so before, a train operator named Thomas Moore was killed on a work train at 14th Street area. And when the members discussed that at the mass membership meeting, again, we voted for strike authorization. Because in the case of Thomas Moore, he stood up on a work train on a flatbed and he was struck by a column and got knocked out. The MTA directed the train operator to take the train from 14th Street up to West Farms in the Bronx because they didn't want to interrupt service and have ambulances respond to the 40th Street area. So they risked his life, and by the time, of course, he got up to West Farms, he had passed away. And it's in that context we voted to strike authorization leading up to the 2005 strike. I point these things out because our attitude, and we told the MTA this, that there are certain things that is a line in the sand for us. And when it comes to exposing our members to catastrophic harm or imminent danger of losing life and limb, that the union would rely on self-help. That we would take direct action regardless. As a consequence, under my administration, there were many instances in which they called the NYPD out to the locations because there were confrontations between staff members, officers, and managers and bosses. Many instances. Because we were saying to them, and I told our officers and staff that if you representing the union out there and you back down from a confrontation under the threat of arrest, don't even bother to come to the union hall. Just stay on the train and go straight to J Street and take your return to work physical and go back to work. Right? And that was our policy. So if you're gonna rock like that, then it means management know that you're not messing around. Now you bring that up to 2020. 140 transit workers died. There's no way things could have reached that far. A mask is a minimum thing. And by the way, the mask is what was required under pandemic policies that were worked on under my administration. So regardless of whether the Centers of Disease Control had authorized mask wearing as yet, that was a requirement under their own policy instructions from since the earlier SARS stuff. In terms of dealing with pandemics, the written policy, right? So they had failed at that elementary level. But there are many other things that should have required an emergency response. Management needed to have seen that the union was responding as if it was a life and death situation, because it was.
It was, yeah.
Right? It was. So whether it was dealing with the issues of the crowding on the buses, or the over circulation, or the separations, or the protective measures, a whole host of measures could have been aggressively fought for at the threat of stopping work and actually stopping work. We stopped work for much less than that under my administration. There's no way this could have reached 140 something local 100 members, 170 something MTA employees. This is the scene of mass murder, right? And the law says actually that the one time that you don't have to comply and grieve is in the face of imminent danger, right? But that's also close to our heart for us, not just because the law says so. The law supports that. So we would have directed action. So and our officers would not have been sheltering in place, hiding down in Bensonhurst and doing whatever they do. If our troops are out there, we are out there, right? So, that has to be the rule. If you're gonna put members in harm's way, you need to lead by example and be the first boots on the ground.
So Utano could have stopped buses and trains from moving if he wanted to.
Well, this is not just about what Utano says to them, but certainly he could have taken action where he could have commanded or demanded immediate aggressive measures rather than let's think about it. Let them decide. He left it up to them, right?
Yeah, because I wish I had the audio queued up, but what's his name? What's the guy name? Earl Phillips says that we told the MTA and they wouldn't listen. Like, what kind of position is that you're speaking as a top 4 officer who's Earl Phillips is the one actually in charge of the safety for the whole entire union.
Right.
and he say that the MTA, he said those bastards did not listen. And I'm like, all right, they didn't listen, and you still allowed us to work.
Right, so he should resign. Once he said they didn't listen, so I tucked my tail between my legs and went home. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, exactly. So now another part of the business I didn't understand during the pandemic was that the union signed a stipulation that whatever workers were to die, we would get $500,000. What I didn't understand is that we have a line of death benefit in the contract already that should protect us from that. What do you think was the business behind the union signing a separate stipulation regarding workers dying during the pandemic?
Well, I think that stipulation for $500,000 was part of the MTA realizing that they were directly culpable for the mass murders that had occurred, and that any big inquiry would have led to very, very embarrassing and potentially criminal charges and action. So what they essentially agreed to was to not challenge that deaths that occurred in the pandemic has to be considered as occurring in the line of duty, as long as the members were active, right? So the provision was already in the contract. I know this because I put that provision in the contract. And when I left, it provided for $100,000 for the very first time for line of duty deaths, right? That was increased up to $500,000 because how they calculate these things at negotiation table is that during the life of a contract, right, how many deaths based on the history of the last 10, 20 years could be reasonably expected to occur. So they expected 1 or 2 deaths over 3 years, maximum. So this was an item in the contract that was costed at $500,000 if it's 1, and 2 if it was 2 at $1 million. They didn't, of course, they didn't anticipate that it would be pandemic numbers, right? So that's what that was about. But if there was going to be, and there should still be an inquiry into why the MTA took so long and so late in protecting its employees, protecting the members, because I don't know that the fatality count at the MTA is probably greater than any other employer around the country.
That's correct. That's a fact.
Right? Well, I'm not certain whether it's a fact. I haven't looked at the data, but it sounds factual. Now that ought to result in a criminal inquiry, right? And the MTA didn't want that, right? And that's an indictment of Governor Cuomo, because he was leading the agency and allowing that to go down, right? Now that is a catastrophic number, right? And I don't know that $500,000 fixes that problem. Not for a family that the head of a family that loses, that a family loses their father or their mother. That is just devastating. So anyway, but that responsibility lies at the feet of the union leaders and union officers. You need to consider whether, when you're dealing with something as serious as that, whether you're comfortable and assured that the union did everything that was humanly and reasonable possible, and then more, to protect life and limb. That's the standard, right? And we know that they failed that standard massively because they were missing in action for the most. Their policy was they're going to hide, but they're going to not do anything about transit workers going to work with shower curtains on the buses, and not even able to put a bandana around your face. And they were not down in Livingston Street or 2 Broadway. They weren't thumping the desk They weren't making phone calls threatening these managers. They weren't storming into these offices and saying you're killing our people, right? So they're responsible, clearly. And and some of these transit workers are going to go and vote for them again, and put them in to continue to do some more. So if people like that foot on their neck, then until they've had enough, the foot gonna stay on the neck. Management foot and the union's leaders foot.
Yeah. And Utano give clues that he don't care about the members. He was on a news interview and said that he won't allow his kids to ride the subway. We talking about grown kids, 20s and 30s. Won't allow them to ride the subway because it's not safe. But he allow us to work in this environment knowing that it's not safe. So it's not safe enough for his kids, but it's safe enough for the members he represent to work. Right. And his kids casually pass through the system, maybe 2 hours. We here for 8+ hours a day.
Well, the contract, by the way, has provisions for emergency situations, and it calls for up to immediate meetings between at the presidential level, right, for emergency action. So, if Utano had triggered that provision in the contract, he would have let us know. Maybe he would not if it did produce any results. But what I'm saying is there's contractual cover, but then as well in the court of public opinion and morality, right? There was plenty justification and cover for taking direct action and even to the point of self-help, meaning we stopped buses from rolling. When there were violations in the depots, I would have union teams show up outside the depot at 4 o'clock in the morning, set up cones, and do safety checks. And we would knock off between 25 to 60% of the buses from service as a result of setting up safety checkpoints. If we don't catch you there on the pullouts, we're going to catch you on the turnaround. We're going to send the teams down there to take the buses out of service. And we're going to stay with the members. We're not going to have the members be cornered and bullied by some white shirt. We're going to stand on the bus and say this bus is out of service. And and with trains as well. And we did that. That's the reputation we built up. And that's when management takes you seriously. And that's how it goes. This is not about you could be 100% right. Take a reasonable position, right? That doesn't translate into action or into remedial measures. If the next guy doesn't believe that you got the balls to do something about it, right? That's correct. Only when there's consequences and repercussions will management comply or act in a reasonable manner. And you have to therefore run a union in a manner that you surround them with consequences and repercussions.
Exactly. Now, staying on the health and safety topic, a lot of people may not know, but your administration conducted many health studies with experts who suggested that our work environments are not that safe. So do you believe that transit workers deserve hazard pay even before the pandemic, or at least certain titles deserve hazard pay before the pandemic?
Well, generally speaking, the transit workers are considerably underpaid for the hazards that we have to deal with on a daily basis continually. And this is virtually almost all our titles. The ones on the road, meaning, speaking as a track person, the road meaning the subways, right? And the ones on the surface, right? The exposures, I don't need to go into it. This is I'll be like preaching to the choir. So I think that generally speaking, having a fight to both elevate, well, first of all, to make sure that we have the maximum protective measures in place is the first order of business and the first priority. Because the approach should not be, if you pay me enough money, I will put my life or my co-worker's life at risk, right? The approach should be, let us eliminate as much risk as possible, engineer out the risk, right? Have abatement measures, and where we have to work under a different risk, we discuss an appropriate compensation, what that should look like. Now, there is hazard pay for certain titles. Historically, there has been for small titles. For instance, there is if you put a work in a manhole, there's confined space pay or premium. Or for asbestos removal for certain titles, you have a premium with asbestos removal. And there are a few others that I'm not thinking of right now. So the concept of hazard pay is not foreign to transit workers. That's what, even for instance, there is snow duty pay, right? For cleaners and number of titles on the road, track workers and so forth. So when you shovel in snow, because the concept would be that if you're exposed to the elements and that way you're clearing platforms and tracks of ice and snow, and therefore exposed to greater opportunities or possibility of slipping and hurting yourself and so on, you should be compensated for that. So there is snow duty pay for thousands of people. So expanding that to hazard pay, especially for people who are exposed to the pandemic, who have greater exposure, that could be reasonably studied and measured. And then a conversation about what should be the appropriate compensation. Folks who are exposed to, who are putting themselves at additional and extra risk, right? Again, first order of business is minimize or eliminate and minimize those risks. And don't trade those things off for a couple of dollars or a couple of pennies. And then secondly, compensate people for putting themselves at risk. And that can take a number of different forms. And should have an emphasis. Because part of the value of that is that it helps create a soundboard to the public to educate them with the enormity of the sacrifices and risk that transit workers are subject to as a routine matter, right? There's very few, most New Yorkers don't even understand, for instance, that if you're a transit worker in New York City, that you pretty much don't see a family for the first 25 years on the job, right? Because working weekends and working nights has become so normalized and routine to you, and missing family stuff for your children and things has become so normalized, and that concept is totally alien to most workforces, right? It is a good exercise to continually remind New Yorkers of what we do, the sacrifices that we make, the things that they enjoy that we can't and we don't. So they're having a conversation about hazard pay, and it helps in a big way further that conversation, right? Mm-hmm. 170 something people have died, right? We should be screaming this from the mountaintops every single day, reminding New Yorkers. That's not the case. Utano want people to forget that.
Exactly. So, and then we were speaking about indictments, like some MTA bosses should be indicted for the deaths of MTA workers. Do you think that some union leaders should be indicted too and arrested and charged?
Yeah, I mean, no, I consider the union leadership to be pretty very liable, right? And I think that if you were to conduct normally, I mean, I'll tell you something. There's a commission of inquiry process if there's a fatality in transit. Every single fatality, they have a policy instruction that requires it. And what they do is that you had the heads of system safety and different departments assemble into a commission of inquiry, and then they study it, and then they issue their report or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Where is the demand for a commission of inquiry into not one death, but 170 something deaths? within a short period of time.
Correct.
Most of the deaths occurred in around the period of March, in the spring of 2020, right?
Right.
There's a commission of inquiry process required by the MTA own process, by policy instruction. Nobody wants to study. Nobody is studying what happened here. That's what the $500,000 by Samuelson and Utano was about. Hush money. It's hush money. From their standpoint, it's hush money, right? From the MTA standpoint, is let's make Samuelson and Utano look good, but let's quiet down the union from demanding an inquiry into how the hell this happened.
Exactly. And even outside of the pandemic, back right during the pandemic in March 2020, we had a train operator by the name of Garrett Goebel who died because a shopping cart was lit on fire. After that, you would think a responsible union president will push for the banning of all shopping carts within the system. I started giving out safety awards, I think like a week ago, of members who stopped turning their head to doing the MTA unsafe favors. How do you feel after the death of the train operator of shopping carts being on the trains and we going about business as usual?
But shopping carts were never authorized to be on trains. They were always prohibited to be on trains. As that's my understanding. Did something change?
No, nothing changed. What the rule actually say is that shopping carts larger than 30 inches in any direction is prohibited. But
what's the date when that rule was adopted?
That's in the rule book.
No, I'm saying, when did that get into the rule book?
Well,
I have never seen that rule
prior to the death of the train operator.
I have never seen that rule.
Yeah, it's in there, and it's also a bulletin 7220, which was just a reminder of the rule that's in the main book of the rules and regulations of transit. But
okay. Understand what I am saying. I'm saying that shopping carts were prohibited from the authority many years ago.
Correct.
I don't know if at some point it was snuck into the rules, but not something that I am aware of. And one of the reasons I know this is because in the earlies, meaning in the 1980s, transit workers themselves, every track gang had a shopping cart that we would steal from the nearby grocery. And that's how we transported our tools on the platforms. So you load up load up tools in your shopping cart, and when you're going on the tracks, you drive it to the end of the platform, and you store it there and take the tools out. And there were incidents where those carts end up rolling onto the tracks and made contact with the third rail. So I know that as a matter of record, shopping carts at one point were prohibited from even being down in the subways.
Got you.
Now, I'm saying that because of the incident. I'm saying that because this was a problem even with employees. Because it caused smoke conditions, fires, explosions. Right? It is ridiculous to say that only of a certain dimension. That has to be a new rule, meaning the last 15 years.
Yeah, it probably came in there the last 15 years.
Because the measurement between the running rail and the third rail is 23 inches.
Oh, I get what you're saying now. So
yeah,
for them to even say 30 inches, that's still
it would make contact once it hit that running rail. That running rail on the free shoe side is the side away from the third rail. But once it hits the third rail side running rail, it makes contact with the and that could lead to explosions, smoke conditions, right? And you can go anywhere with that. Smoke conditions could result in mass murder,
as we seen.
So I'm saying what I'm saying to you,
kill you. It's the smoke.
Yeah. What I'm saying to you is that stuff that somebody was sleeping. Maybe ask Earl Phillips when that rule entered, because Earl Phillips has been sleeping on the job now for all of those years.
Listen, Earl Phillips said that I called him a coconut, and I never called Earl Phillips a coconut, but that's why he said he mad at me, because I called him a coconut.
Well, you should call him an idiot, but that's more fitting. I mean, he started off in the safety department safety department. Interesting enough, under my administration, I approved him coming out, and then he ended up with John Samuelson, and then he's been. I mean, even though they skipped over him and put Utano over him to be run for president, he's a good old boy. He'll just go along with it. That's who he is.
The go along, get along gang. Now, also in the booklet that we was talking about, the benefits and reforms booklet, you had a section in there saying it's about respect, and it was talking about discipline. How important was it for you to get these discipline numbers down? Because you had it listed in 2002, there was 16,773. You know, they could fill up half the Barclays Center. You know. Right. With those numbers, how important was it for you to get those numbers down?
Well, it was massive. We in the 2002 negotiations, we held it at a hotel, I think the Roosevelt Hotel, and the capacity was like several hundred people. So on our side of the way these things go, the opening round of the negotiations, we had about 400 union officers and shop stewards, and on management side, the room they had about a dozen of their people, and we opened up negotiations, and I said, dignity and respect there will be no contract without dignity and respect, without us making progress in this area. And I asked the union officers, for everyone who has been subject to disciplinary action, please stand, and all 400 stood up.
Wow.
I think Steve Downs might have remained seated. At that time, he hadn't done it. He got 10 days for splitting a switch up at 207 Street. He had some years later. But anyway, I think he was the only one who had never been brought up on charges. Right. But in any event, so the whole room stood up of union officers and shop stewards. So we had been, before I got into office, we had been campaigning against what we characterize the disciplinary system as a system of plantation justice. So our message was that they're not running a transportation system, they're running a plantation, and they're treating us as if we're working on a plantation, right? Mm-hmm. So we elevated the issue of dignity and respect to high importance in terms of to give transit workers restore a degree of dignity and respect to them. That's why we attack second-class citizenship of traffic checkers and of cleaners, and the issue of females on the job. And that's why we attack the issue of discipline. For instance, of those 16,700 disciplines in 2001 or whatever, the majority were for what they call time and attendance violations. And most of these time attendance, it was for sick rule violations, right? And not sick abuse, but for sick use. So a priority in the 2002 negotiations was to fix these things like that, which is why we insisted upon and got the provision where 70% of the members with the best sick records were no longer under house arrest rules, right? Home confinement and house arrest, which had been around under what they call the system of beakies visiting your home, come knocking on your door with a doctor sometimes and a beaky to see whether you're home. People were brought up on charges if you change location from your home to the grocery to the pharmacy without informing command center or control or the RCC that you were changing location. You could get a charge between your home and the grocery, between the grocery and the pharmacy, between the pharmacy and dropping off groceries by your mother and coming back home. Any one of those, you could run afoul of a disciplinary charge. And they loved that, right? So we told them there will be no contract unless we made progress in the area of dignity and respect for transit workers, right? And because we were on the streets protesting, and not because we said it, but we were tearing up the streets, and we were stopping jobs and slowing jobs down, and so they understood that in the meeting room, in the negotiation rooms, that we were not bullshitting, right? So that's why we were able to win those provisions. It is not about what you say across the table. It's about whether you come to the table strong. That's all it is, So.
Got you. And one more thing I'm going to bring up from that PDF, the benefits and reforms PDF, I'm gonna put it on the screen right now, is the training and upgrade childcare, which was very important because it helped women and people of color to get in non-traditional roles like in maintenance and things of that nature. And during Samuelson administration, this program was suspended basically for 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And then when it came back, it didn't come back to what you originally negotiated. So can you explain to the people the importance? Why was it important for you to create this training and upgrade provision in the contract?
Well, I'll do you one better. Tony Utano belongs to the power. He's a power maintainer. He comes out of a group that's considered skilled trades, right? And they tend to be in a profile like him, right? And there was a program in transit called skills upgrade and training, something like that. And they will, when transit would run short of trained or skilled workers, they would hire from the outside into they had an apprenticeship program, right? But it was exclusively hiring from the outside. Tony Utano and others in the old guard of the union were steadfastly opposed to the notion of promoting cleaners, station agents, and other entry-level people into the skilled trades inside of transit. That was one of the big changes that I insisted upon when I took over. That the promotional opportunities had to prioritize existing transit workers who were in the entry-level titles, right? And so they were ideologically opposed and hostile to that notion. So that's why that became one of the first targets of Samuelson and Utano when they took over. They stopped it dead in its tracks. The notion of that you would have someone who 6 months or 18 months before was a cleaner, right? They looked down on that. And that's something that I insisted upon, or a female, right? So training and upgrade fund did not exist before the first contract I negotiated in 2002. Neither did a childcare fund. And the problem is that if you're a train operator or a bus operator or conductor, and you have to pick up a train in Toussaint Street Yard, say, or in Flatbush Depot, a bus, right? At 4:30 in the morning in order to prepare for the rush hour service. Where are you going to leave your child?
Exactly.
You up at 3 o'clock trying to get out of the house. Where are you dropping that child off? So not having childcare provisions meant that the job was inaccessible to thousands of women. So we told them we have to tackle this. We have to begin measures to fix that, to correct that. So where we were going with this is trying to create 24-hour drop-off service for children. And we were negotiating jointly with 1199 and others to create some citywide services funded by employer money that provide drop-off services. So, and then of course, and we started off with created stipends until we get those union-run centers. We started giving people stipends to be able to pay for childcare or pay for summer programs and so forth. And again, this is stuff that affected mostly the entry-level titles, mostly titles that were predominantly Black and Hispanic. So that was a very conscious approach to tackling second-class citizenship inside of the union, committing money to that. Now, it also means that transit workers, the ones who are narrow-minded and selfish, they might take umbrage. They might have beef with us taking money from the contract and putting it in training and upgrade for a cleaner or station agent, or for a female to be able to assist the female with the child care, with the burdens and responsibilities. You have some members who say, no, give me a quarter of a point more raise rather than putting money in that. So we had those fights about what are the priorities, what is important to build a strong union, right? What is important to create solidarity? You have to invest in that, and that requires money. It requires that you prioritize that. And so those things were created for the first time under my administration, 2002. A childcare fund, training and upgrade fund, widows and orphans fund, all of those, and a number of other measures. Traffic checkers relief. Traffic checkers had no health benefits, no pension, and they had 0 to 25 hours, right? No full-time jobs contractually, right? Those things required putting economic value into fixing these problems.
Yeah. So some just came in my head real quick because, and I want to go back a little bit to the Donald Yates saying that pensions are not mandatory subjects of bargaining, but one thing that is a mandatory subject of bargaining is the wage progression and years to top pay, in which Samuelson took us from 3 years to 5 years top pay. Right. Now that's definitely a mandatory subject of bargaining, and they always try to find ways to sell out the unborn. So the pension, the tier 6 wasn't a fluke because we seen what happened when they changed our 3 to 5 years top pay. Was that ever on the table when you was president, where the MTA tried to change us from 3 years to 5 years?
That's been part of their demand virtually in every round. And again, we told them that a principle in our approach to negotiations is the elimination of two-tier systems and second-class citizenship. What Samuelson did is not just increase the progression for new hires, but they targeted cleaners. With that progression as well, existing cleaners, right? So that so what you're seeing is a return to second class citizenship, right? Because they don't have a problem with that, because that's the old guard way. That's the old way and the old conception of what a union looks like in their eyes. Divide up the members, right? Take care of the more elite titles, right? And screw the traffic checkers and the cleaners and so on and so forth. And just do what you need to do to get reelected every 3 years. And that's the approach. Yeah. So if you want that type of union, then Utano is your man.
Now, another thing that I found strange was that Utano team filed union charges against a member for basically writing grievances for members and representing those members. What's up with that? Did that ever happen in your administration where you would bring charges against a member for basically representing members in grievances?
Well, that never happened. And just so the question of whether you can file a grievance, the contract is very clear that any member can file a grievance, and in fact, any non-member has the right to file a grievance, and the union is clearly obligated contractually and as a matter of law in representing members and non-members. Right? Some of these officers are under the mistaken notion that they don't have to represent non-members. That's a violation of the law, right? Because not just the contract, the law, the Taylor law, because the contract applies to all covered employees. It doesn't use the term members of the local. It says all covered employees, meaning the bargaining unit consists of members and other covered employees, which is non-members. Anyone can file a grievance. The contract, however, says that the union has the right to prioritize grievances. And what that means, and what always has been historically applied, is that the union has the right to decide which grievances reach arbitration or goes to arbitration. Reason being, because the outcome of a grievance at arbitration could have an impact broader than just an individual person. It could affect a whole section, a division, or the entire union. And therefore, that's important. But if you file a grievance as a non-member, even it has to be heard at step 1 and step 2 under the contract and under the law. So this notion, this idea of trying to intimidate people, first of all, is a violation of, they're probably targeting someone who they don't perceive as being on their side. And that's an additional violation of the law, because it means there is a violation of your First Amendment rights, the freedom of association. Right? You're free to disagree with them and to don't like them. That's your right. Right? Or to don't like a union rep or a union leadership. And they should not be the subject of retaliation as a result of that. What you talking about here is the first time I'm hearing anything like this. It means that they're really pushing the envelope, pushing the boundaries, and trying to bully and intimidate people. And at the end of the day, under the conditions of this lockdown, they getting away with stuff. But what I'm saying to you all is that when these guys show up in the crew rooms, if they only having virtual contact now, right? You can reach these guys because you gotta confront them aggressively when they come out in the field and when they come into the crew room. So let them know, just like what I said, repercussions and consequences to management, repercussions and consequences to union leaders and officers that effing around. You know what I'm saying? Because
I agree with you.
They're being bullies, and if you're going to bully, then treat them accordingly. Treat them, handle your business. Yeah. I'm telling you something. I mean, that's how. Before that is our thing, right? Before I became president of the union, I was fired from the MTA from the summer of 1998, and I remained fired for 2.5 years until the elections in the end of 2000, where I was elected president. Right? So I am not someone who just talks the talk. I walk the walk more than all these other clowns that want to talk about what coulda and shoulda do and all that type of stuff. I did 2.5 years in the street before I became president of the union. Right? But that was because I was targeted on bullshit charges, because I would stand up to management and lead members in action, right? In contrast to some of the people that the members are, Tony Utano never did a day in the street. Steve Dongs, the big militant, he split a switch up at 207 Street Yard and quietly went behind everybody back and took a 10 days in the street for it, right? But his typical mantra in the RTO crew rooms was that he'd be reading a novel in the corner somewhere, right? But never leading a fight, never getting in any boss's face. Meanwhile, he was reading while the room was burning. All sorts of harassment and abuse all around, right? You have to fight your way out of those things. You have to fight your way by organizing members and organizing for self-help when needed and direct action, right? You can file a grievance here and a grievance there, but if you pull members together and management sees that becomes a major deterrent to them going out and abusing people, and you have to be prepared to go that route, to walk that road.
I agree. So before we get out of here, because we coming up on 2 hours, I have one more question to ask you. If you already made the distinction that basically Paulie and Utano is basically the same person. If Utano was to get elected back in, what could transit members expect these next 3 years as far as leadership? Do you think things will get worse?
Yeah, I think that if Utano gets elected, and probably if Navarro get elected because, his reputation in the track department, from what I've been told by track workers, is he boasts about having a new model vehicle every 3 years. So that's, he's in the making money, Paul Navarro. Utano is what I described, old school, working with management all the way down the road. So if Utano gets in there, some of the things that management wants badly, they're going to get. For one thing, the pension is going to get worse. Management wants to increase the retirement age from 55 to, say, 62. But along the way, they will be happy to take 57 and a half towards retirement, right? They want to tighten up in terms of what your pensionable earnings and other provisions, but that would be the main thing: increase the retirement age, right? Clamp down on more on measures that prevent them from fully placing transit workers under their thumb. For instance, changing the 70-30 provision so that less than 70% have the free from house arrest. They would love to see that because that will give them a chance to resume their disciplinary machine even more. The disciplines are up anyway, but that would be one of their targets. And I can go through a number of things that that never sat well with them. Samuelson already agreed to increase the medical contribution from 1.5 to 2%, right? Utano would agree to increase that more because he could always say because of Roger, right? But the MTA would love to see that. Now, I'll tell you something. That 1.5% was agreed to, and the members voted for it. This was not something hidden. The members voted for it. They were told that this is the deal, the settlement we made coming out of the strike. That 1.5%, we calculated what the cost of adding an additional benefit was. The additional benefit was medical coverage between when you reach age 55 and you get to Medicare age 65, that 10-year period. Since we have the retirement, transit workers retire, they had no medical coverage during that period of time, right? Because the providers, HIP and GHI, collapsed in Florida, Pennsylvania, a number of other locations around the country. And doctors' offices and specialists were not taking the MTA coverage because the MTA coverage was still calculated at 1985 rates, right? So the 1985 rates, you walk into a doctor's office, they will say they're not accepting that coverage, right? So we costed out what it would cost to upgrade the coverage, right? And that is what accounted. So in the strike, the negotiation was they wanted a medical contribution. We said we would only consider taking a medical contribution back to the members if we get an increased medical benefit that we did not have before, right? So of course, in the elections, Samuelson and others would say instead, or this was free money given to the MTA, right? For nothing, and that's how it was sold. And some of them were even more devious. They misrepresented the formula and said the contribution of 1.5 doubles every year. So in 3 years, it will become 4.5. They put that in leaflets and they put it out there, right? And some of the newspapers ran with that and helped them. So they pushed that out there. So the trick was this: you're in the middle of a strike and you have to make a deal to bring your members home safely, right? You get an increased medical benefit. They get a concession because the calculation of the cost of the benefit was about three quarters of the 1.5, right? So What we did in the next, and because we consider this to be a manageable concession that we could have fixed down the road. So what we did in the next round of bargaining is we got them to agree to cap it at 1.5 and limit it to 40 hours. Right? Because we calculated what the cost would have been to knock it down to 1% or to eliminate it completely. And that turned up in that round of negotiations to be a bridge too far to reach at that time, 2009. So we took the first step in crossing that bridge, and Samuelson in 2012 pulled the bridge from under the members' legs and move it up to 2% contribution.
And they don't like to talk about that. They like to talk about your 1.5,
yeah.
but they don't talk about Samuelson increasing it to 2%. And
again, these Garrison Beach and Benson Hills boys, they can do no wrong, you know.
Exactly. And you know, speaking of money, the PPP loan that the union took out, $3 million. What's your thoughts on that?
By the way, I'm also hearing that Utano and they're looking to restore the old pension plan. When we took it over, it was $5 million in the red, and we stopped that pension plan. Utano and they're looking to restore that pension plan, and I'm waiting to get more details on that.
That's the union pension plan, correct?
The union pension. That's the biggest liability for your dues. What the union has to pay for staff towards the fund that pays staff when they retired, and so on. When I took over, that fund was $5 million in the red.
Wow.
And we stopped people going into that new plan, and we recalculated the plan so that transit workers would be working in the union would get roughly the equivalent of what they would have earned if they were senior transit workers, meaning with 25 years or so on the job, right? Rather than become rich when they leave the union hall. Utano is now looking to restore it, even though he applied for that PPP loan, in which he would have represented to the government that the union was in trouble and had problems making budget. So he got a loan. How much was it? 2, 3, 4 million?
Almost $3 million.
Okay. So he got a $3 million loan, represented to the government that they having problems meeting budget. And then he presents to the executive board last week to make the staff pension plan more
lucrative.
More lucrative for people like him. Self-dealing is what it's called, right? So without answering the questions about how is this going to be accounted for, are there any union reserves that's going to be drawn down in order to pay for this increase in the cost of the staff pension plan? Because how it works is that the union's dues money is then you have to calculate how much is needed to contribute to the plan in order to comply with the law. The law generally requires that pension plans be able to pay 80% of their liabilities. So you have to fund it at the level of 80% of your liability. So you have a large number of people already retired, right? And a large number of people coming up in retirement. You got to fund all of that going out. So it's the biggest liability on your dues, right? I cut that back. So I had the actuaries calculate that if you put together your MTA pension or your MaxStore pension, and you put it with what you got as a union officer, when that number, the sum of those two numbers should roughly resemble what a senior transit workers would have made. So they came up with a calculation, and we changed the plan, and we made that the rule. Just like we take everybody out of this Cadillac health benefit plan and put everybody into the MTA health benefit plan, Utano is en route to change all of that back to how it used to be. So under that pension plan, I receive, as the president of the union for 9 years, I receive a check of $600 every month from Local 100. That's what I get. You understand? But when I was president, I was signing checks for $3,000 and $4,000 and $5,000 a month to Willie James and these guys. And some of them were retiring. They had the lump sum option. Some of them were retiring with $250,000 lump sum, $750,000, $900,000 lump sum.
Wow.
Right? This is in addition to having unlimited paid sick time. Utano yearns for those days to come back again.
So basically, with him doing this, he could bankrupt the union. It sounds like.
Well, he himself, because he's the longest serving officer, has the most to gain from that. You know, and if you let Paulie Navarro could see some new cars in that deal too. You know.
Wow, that's crazy. Well, Roger,
yeah.
Before we get out of here, anything you want to say to the people, you want to leave them with? You know, it's always a pleasure talking to you. This 2 hours went by so quick.
Yeah, well, no, I do have much to say. I mean, I just watching stuff from a distance and wishing people well, but every generation got to do their own fighting.
Correct.
You know, I mean, and you know, you had to. By the end of 2008, 2009, I had made my contribution. You know, and then it's left to the generation coming behind to continue the march. You know. So
and we are that generation, and I hope the people really heard when you said when these union guys come to these crew rooms, we got to make them feel like they not welcome.
But chairs used to be moving in the union hall. Let me tell you something, right? And they would, at one point they wouldn't come out to the crew rooms because they needed escorts, right? Mm. You know what I'm saying? If these people doing you wrong. There got to be repercussions and consequences, right? And you can take them on legally, or you can take them, or you can handle your business and let them know. You understand?
I agree, and you know, you guys was moving chairs around for issues not near as serious as what we dealt with the pandemic. You know, people actually lost their lives. People actually got sick, and we still let them come to our crew rooms. Without jumping over hurdles or anything. Like, we have to change our attitude. And I tell my team that on Progressive Action, you can't let them come into these crew rooms, these bus depots undeterred. It don't look good. You know, and if we not willing to fight for our lives, literally, as the pandemic showed us, then what are we going to be willing to fight for? Roger,
absolutely.
It was a pleasure talking to you. I don't know what you're doing to keep looking young. Maybe I need to start having some grandkids or something like that. I don't know what you're doing. But yo, next time you're in New York, give me a call. Let's go get some food or something.
All right. Take it easy. Good luck.
All right, sound good. I'll speak to you later.
Nice. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. So yeah, that was Roger Toussaint. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this interview. It was an in-depth interview. I love speaking to Roger. Roger's filled with information. I really wish that he had like a microchip that he could take and insert inside of us so we could really see what's going on within our union. He's a man of unlimited knowledge. You know, unlimited knowledge. If you guys enjoyed this show, you could donate via Cash App, Progressive Action 100. You could also donate via Stars Live on Facebook. You know, it looked like we kept over 100 people watching the whole entire stream, which was great. Over 2 hours. I'm glad you guys tuned in. Please share out the live. Please encourage your coworkers to get involved. Like I said, Roger mentioned something very important. We can't allow these guys to come to our crew rooms, to be in union meetings, saying whatever they want to say, doing whatever they want to do. We lost coworkers. I was one of the few who got sick. I lost about 6 coworkers that I knew personally, and I don't take none of this stuff lightly. And we got to start stepping up our game and getting involved. You know, stop saying, "Oh, I don't like union politics." Union politics is controlling everything that we do inside the MTA. And we got to start getting involved. There's nothing else to say, nothing else to do. I love you guys. Donate to the platform. Catch you guys later.